What's up, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Joshua Perry Show. Of course, I'm your host, former Buckeye captain, national champ, former NFL player, and current Big Ten Network and 97.1 The Fan analyst, Joshua Perry. This is a podcast where we talk sports, life, and everything else. Of course, we are broadcasting on the Zedia Network. Follow at Zedia Network on Twitter for big-time podcasts and great content. This episode of the Joshua Perry Show is sponsored by Todd Pennington with Columbus-based Revolution Mortgage. If you are looking to purchase a new home or get out of renting, right now is the time. With historically low rates and fast closings, Todd can have you in your dream home in no time. Contact Todd Pennington at 614-390-9520. Again, 614-390-9520. Or visit revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington for more info. Revolution Mortgage is an equal housing lender, NMLS ID 1686046. So Todd actually is somebody who I work with in my real estate business. He's one of my preferred lenders, and I'm not kidding, guys. Right now, first off, rates are historically low. It's crazy. And even though Columbus, specifically in this market, housing values are rising, with the low rates, it really does offset in terms of the amount of interest that you'll pay and what your monthly payment ends up being. So it's always good to at least call and figure out where you can go and what you can do and how much you can afford. And of course, if you're looking to make that jump, your boy is a real estate agent, so holler at me too. But I want to get into this week's show, and it's a little bit of a different show. A lot of times we sit up here, I'll talk about football, a little bit of pro ball. I'll bring in a guest, and then I'll finish up kind of with some news. But this week's going to be a little bit different. I think there's a lot of stuff going on crazy in the world, and I need to address it. The world is still burning with political unrest, with racial unrest. And so I want to revisit Black Lives and Black Lives Matter. I want to talk about political hypocrisy just a little bit. And, of course, we'll talk about college football and pro football. We had some big news with actual college football games being played this weekend, and some pro football news with roster cutdowns and everything else. Looking forward to week one. But there's no who's who this week. We're not doing an interview this week, but I will bring in my producer, all-time great guy, Andrew Zoldan, and he'll share some thoughts on college and pro football. So to start it off, I want to talk about Black Lives Matter. And this is like a point of pain for a lot of people. Obviously, pain for Black people because we even have to say that our lives matter. And then for some reason, there are pain from other people who feel like our movement's trying to quiet some of the voices and not pay attention to white lives or, Hispanic lives or Asian lives or whatever. There are other people who say that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. I'll jump into that in a sec. But it's a weird spot to be in where in 2020 that we have to talk about the fact that Black lives do matter and that they're important. And when I talk about Black Lives Matter, me personally, and not everybody, but me personally, when I talk about it as a concept and not an organization. Like there is the Black Lives Matter organization, but when I say that Black Lives Matter, I am not talking about a group of people who are, politically motivated for X, Y, and Z. I'm talking about everyday Black people like myself. We matter. And I feel like intelligent people can separate the two. Like if you're somebody who is a critical thinker, you know that things don't always happen in a linear fashion. You know that things aren't groups and movements aren't a monolith, but they have different subgroups and different motives within. You can understand that the group Black Lives Matter and the concept of the fact that Black Lives Matter are two separate things. But if you're an ignorant person, you willfully refuse to acknowledge that difference, and that's a problem. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're not talking about making excuses for Black people that make bad decisions. We're not talking about letting criminals, go without punishment, whatever the case is that people say. We're talking about people's constitutional right to due process and the fact that a police officer should not kill somebody on the scene because of a perceived threat, if that threat is not an imminent attack on their life. And so we can get into it. It's a dangerous job. I understand that. And I'm not trying to say that police officers shouldn't protect themselves. I'm not trying to say that there aren't situations where use of force and drawing a lethal weapon would be the course of action. But what I'm saying is too often, too many times, and disproportionately, black males, black people in general, but specifically black males, are treated like they are the boogeyman, and the only way to control them, the only way to arrest these people, the only way to mitigate a situation is to draw a weapon and shoot them. And it's a bad deal. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're not talking about black on black crime. And it's one of those things that we hear all the time. And it's really disappointing that people do that. It's not about black on black crime. If you spend enough time around black people, to the folks who say, well, with Black Lives Matter, what about black on black crime? If you spend enough time around black people in black communities, you would understand that churches, community organizations, city councils that are black elected officials, et cetera, are always trying to do things to mitigate black on black crime. Churches are reaching out to young black people, school systems, after school programs, community organizations, much like myself. I have a foundation, Joshua Perry Family Foundation, and we work with kindergarten through 8th graders throughout Central Ohio. Part of our outreach is to go into under-resourced, largely minority neighborhoods, and we spend time with these children so they can understand that there is a way out of their situation, and it has to do with education. I'm not telling all these kids to go to college because it's something we can get into on a different episode, but if you learn a trade, if you go to EMT school, if you decide to go to a 2-year or 4-year university, there is a way to make it through. For these young kids, we teach them about problem solving and having an outlet for all the things that are going on in their lives. And if you actually stepped into some of these people's lives, you would understand why these communities are in such disarray. But again, that's a different conversation. We're not talking about black on black crime because we handle that within our communities. Y'all don't see us do it. The news media doesn't show up with their cameras for those movements and for those protests and for those marches, but they absolutely happen. And the other thing about black on black crime, before I move on, is you can look at crime as a who it happens to, as a product of proximity and not a product of actual race. So I live in a white neighborhood around a lot of white people. So it's going to be, if a white criminal commits a crime up here, it's more than likely going to happen to another white person. I had a friend say to me one time who was really pissed off about all the stuff going on in the world. He's like, well, instead of black people telling their kids to be scared of the cops, they need to tell their kids to be scared of other black people because your child will be more likely to get shot by a black person than a white person. And I said, you're absolutely wrong, because as long as I live my ass up in Olentangy local schools, my kids aren't more likely to be shot by a black person than a white person. They would be more likely to be accosted by a white person because of proximity. And that's how these things go, but y'all want to ignore all that stuff. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we want to stay on topic. We are talking about police brutality. We are talking about extrajudicial killings of black people that should not happen. Okay. And the reason why we are in the place that we're in society, folks, is because we have been trying to tell people for so long about what's going on in our communities, about what's happening to us, and nobody has listened. And I can remember a time when I was playing in the league when Kaepernick was doing all his kneeling and everything. That wasn't that long ago. We're talking 2016, 2017. And now we're here in 2020 where all this stuff is happening. I talked to my father, who's 65 years old, and he's telling me similar stories from his childhood. He said that his mother used to drive to work with this white woman. My grandmother would pick this white woman up. They would drive on this major thoroughfare in New Jersey. I can't remember what it was, to work. And there was one day where my grandmother was by herself because the white woman she would drive with was sick. And the police officer who used to be staked out on that thoroughfare pulled her over because the police officer thought that my grandmother stole that car. That is harassment. And that was going on back when my dad was a kid. Like I said, he's 65, grew up in the 50s and 60s. That's similar to what we see today. So we can look at a time where in the 60s and in the 50s, it was legal for some of this discrimination to happen. And now we're in a place where it is illegal, but it is still happening. And it's absolutely shameful. And the fact of the matter is, unless we all become critical of the systemic wrongs that are going on, then we're never going to be able to overcome them. And what I mean is that when you look at the formation of policing, right? Go back to slaves were freed. The police at the time after slaves were freed were there to obviously police communities, and they had responsibilities elsewhere. But when you look at the framework of the Black codes, where Black people had to be employed, where Black people had to be home at a certain time, there was a curfew and all these different things, you couldn't work in a certain area of the city, etc. Part of the police force was to find these Black people and arrest them, and then when they went to jail, they were working on the chain gangs and everything else, essentially another form of slavery. And I'm not saying that is what our police system is today, because it's absolutely not. But what I am saying is that it was built into how policing came about when Black people were freed. And we have to acknowledge that. We absolutely do, because I think that the context really does play into what's happening today. And when we address these things and when we're critical of society and these systemic wrongs, it doesn't mean that we hate America or that America isn't one of the best places to live. It's a really weird conversation to say that, where, we're supposed to watch these things happen to our people over and over again. And then because we love America, we're not supposed to say anything about what's happening that's wrong. I'll pose it like this. If you have a family member that you love and they're addicted to drugs, and you don't say anything to them because you love them and you have respect for them and you admire them, you're really not helping that person. You're really adding to the thing that makes them bad, the thing that's hurting their life, the thing that is setting them back. And so as a nation, if we have a race problem or a racism problem and we don't say anything about it because we don't, we're the greatest and, it's worse elsewhere and we've come a long way, we're still hurting ourselves. We're hurting as a nation anytime we choose to ignore the fact that we have some legitimate problems here. And I'm talking about race right now and Black Lives Matter, but we can extrapolate this out to a lot of different things. I think we have a problem within our education system, and it's not public schooling necessarily that I'm talking about. I think we have a problem in how we encourage young people to leverage and mortgage their futures for a degree, and then we put them in crippling debt. I think we have a sexism problem where women working in certain industries and certain positions of power are doubted, they are disrespected, and they are treated less than. We see it in the wage gap where they aren't paid as much as men are. That's a problem that we have. We have a problem when it comes to people that were born here and people that are immigrants. We have a problem when it comes to folks that don't fit into that typical American Christian ideal and folks that come from other religious backgrounds, right? And so these are systemic issues that are built into the fabric of America. And anytime we address these issues, because it's systemic, we can look at a privilege. If you're a white Christian, you have a certain level of privilege here in America, whether you want to admit that or not. If you're a male, Black, white, whatever, you have a level of privilege over women in America. If you're a white person in general, you have a level of privilege in America over other ethnic groups. And until we start addressing these things and we reconcile with them, and people are willing to say that they are privileged, I don't think we're able to overcome this. And when we talk about that privilege thing, and this is really big because, people get all out of whack. Well, I worked super hard and I had struggles in my life and et cetera. And I'm not going to say that you didn't, because you probably did. But when you're a white person, one of your struggles wasn't the color of your skin that kind of took you away from opportunities. And I say it all the time, like when you're a poor white kid and you finally get to a university, nobody necessarily has to know that you're poor. But when you're Black, people always know that you're Black. And it's the same thing. If you're a man, you have had built-in advantages over women, whether you want to admit that or not. It's absolutely true. When you are an American, somebody who was born here, you speak the King's English, all that stuff, you have built-in advantages over people who are perceived to be less American because of the hue of their skin or the accent that they speak with. These are all things that we must reconcile with. It's a big deal. And then I would say to the people who detract and say, well, Black Lives Matter, but so do all lives and so do blue lives and all this, that, and the third. I'm not going to fight you on that. I absolutely believe that all lives matter. I believe that blue lives matter. I think cops have a really dangerous job. I think it's really hard. I think police officers need to be respected. Absolutely. I think that you say, oh, you need to comply. I agree with that 100%. I believe that police officers also need to be held to the highest of standards. And when they do so, that is where you see the respect and admiration that we see for that line of work. However, Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and all these other different slogans that people have come up with are merely a response to a movement, a valuable movement, and it's a response that's supposed to take away and detract from. And that is really, really disappointing because you can say that all lives matter, but until you start treating everybody with respect, right? Women, Black people, children, immigrants, people with disabilities, everybody. Until you start treating all these folks with respect, then you're not telling me that all lives matter. When you say blue lives matter, I agree with you. But one thing that is not true about that is a blue life. These are people in a uniform and they have a tough job. And when they're on that job, it is dangerous, it's hard, and they go through some things that I personally would not be willing to go through. That's why I am not a law enforcement officer. I chose a different line of work because I can't handle it. But one thing that does happen is when they are off duty, they get to take that badge off, they get to undo that uniform, and they get to put on their street clothes. And now they're just somebody's mother or father, they're somebody's brother, sister, cousin, son, daughter, whatever it is. And they get to go on about their life. But doesn't matter if I'm at home, doesn't matter if I'm out in the street, I can't take off my Black skin. It's not a uniform, it's not a choice. And so that's where the true difference comes. And even a privileged black man like myself, I'm still Black at the end of the day. You can look through my bank account, I got a little bit of money in there. I get pulled over by the police officers, my bank balance is not stamped on my forehead. They see a Black man, that's it. That is a part of the issue. And so as we go through and we address this stuff, you're watching the world burn a little bit. You know, America is in a really bad way. And there are a lot of reasons for it. There are a lot of people that have added fuel to the fire. And it's a really disappointing thing to see, and it's tough. And all of that's compounded, obviously, by an election year where you don't know who's telling the truth. You don't know what's smoke, what's not. All these political ads are coming out trying to confuse people. And all the while, we have a movement about people's lives that we're still trying to put on the forefront here. And so we have to keep these things in mind, folks, that some of these cities, the way that they're burning right now, there's a solution to that. And that's to make sure that police officers are only using force when absolutely necessary. It's to make sure that we're respecting Black people and we're creating systems and laws that can hold people accountable to their actions. It is to make sure that our communities are safe because people feel safe. It is to make sure that our young people are receiving a valuable education so we can break down some of these systems of violence and strife and rage. I'll put it to you like this, going back to some of these communities that are hurting right now. I'm a true believer, obviously, that racism is an issue here in America. The bigger issue along with racism, though, is poverty. And those two things go hand in hand. When you look at every legitimate attack on Blackness that's happened in America, part of it has been an economic attack. And you can look at the Red Summer as an example. You can go to St. Louis and you can see in their history that city's burned down before because Black people were becoming successful. Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma is one of the biggest examples, Black Wall Street, to where Black folks had booming businesses, they had hospitals, they had churches, schools burned to the ground. And none of these businesses were insured by white insurance companies because of why would you do that if you're trying to ensure that these people cannot build legitimate wealth? When you look fast forward, the GI Bill after World War II, Black folks came home, they couldn't get access to VA loans, and credit and real estate redlining has been such a big deal. That's part of the reason why I got into real estate, is to try to help people, improve their lives by owning real estate, which is one of the biggest determinants of net worth and generational wealth here in the United States of America. So along with not being able to get the VA loans, they also couldn't get their GI Bill for school. And you can look at education as one of the main ways that people are able to expand their income. Now, that uh, period of time after World War II, we saw a baby boom, but we also saw an explosion in net worth in America. Why? Is because you had educated people who were buying real estate. People came home from war, they went to school, they became educated, and then they were able to buy real estate with a zero down loan. And like I said, one of the biggest ways to increase your net worth and provide generational wealth is through real estate. And so we see these assaults, educational and financial, that have gone on. And part of the deal for us as people who want to see this improvement is we need to open up those opportunities to banking, lending for these communities, but also opportunities, like I said, trade school, 2-year, 4-year university, anything that can help people improve their situation. But until we get serious about this stuff, man, I don't think this is going to continue to be an issue. And it's really hard for me to sit here and watch it, but I just had to get that off my chest. Black Lives Matter. We're not talking about anything other than the fact that we want to be respected and cared for, and we want people to be held accountable when our lives are taken. So just wanted to throw that out there. I'm going to get on something a little bit lighter, and then I'm actually going to get back on some bullshit here in a sec. But I wanted to bring my guy, Andrew Zoldan, in. He's the great producer for this show, just all-around good guy. And I wanted to talk a little bit of college football. So you're a sports guy. You've been tuned into all these things. We've got, down south, they're playing ball. They're playing ball in the southeast, southwest, all that kind of stuff. West Coast, Midwest, they said no. So we watched some college football games happen this week. We're going to get some bigger games in the next 2 weeks from the Power 5 conferences. What are your thoughts so far?
My thoughts are, how the hell is the Big Ten not playing? I mean, it's just crazy to me. It's crazy to me, and I know you have a lot more inside information. You have a lot stronger opinions and knowledge on it, but it's just crazy to me that there's going to be games and the Big Ten is not going to be involved. But in terms of what we're actually going to get, I'm excited to see what these teams can do in the SEC. I went to Mizzou, so I'm a Mizzou fan. We opened the season at home against Bama on ESPN, September 26th. So I'm a little nervous about that, but I'm excited to see what these high-ranked teams can do, especially the ones that have a couple guys opting out. So I'm interested to see kind of what the season actually does look like once, conference play starts and it's not Memphis playing Central Arkansas and stuff like that.
So I got a question talking about the SEC. I feel like the SEC is a little bit more wide open than people are making it out to be. Like LSU, obviously, I think is going to have some troubles. Alabama is going to be really good, but you've got Florida that's sitting right there. You've got Texas A&M that people are high on. You've got Georgia that's going to be a competitor. Like, do you think that there could be some really good drama coming from that conference this year?
Well, I think the winner of the SEC is going to have at least one loss, which normally the winner of the SEC goes undefeated. So I think it'll be interesting this year because I think there definitely will be a one-loss team that wins, if not a two-loss team. And then what I think is going to be interesting is if there's a college football playoff, are they going to have two SEC teams? Are they going to have one of the AAC teams? Because, there's no Big Ten, no Pac-12. So it's going to be interesting to see them beat up on each other and not have the cupcake games that they usually do. Like Bama doesn't get its week 11 cupcake game like they normally have. And then it's going to be interesting to see if, the two teams that make the SEC championship both get into the playoff, if there's even a playoff.
That'd be interesting. So if you had to do a CFP kind of playoff bracket right now, who would you have as your 4 teams?
Ooh.
No, I'll put you on the spot a little bit.
Put me on the spot right there. I mean, you definitely got to have Clemson because I think they're the best team. Even if Ohio State was playing, you would have Clemson as the top overall team, in my opinion. And then Bama is just, they're always there, so you got to give them the benefit of the doubt this year. You got to think that either Oklahoma or Texas is going to represent this year. Texas, are they back? We don't know.
They're always back, but they're never back.
And then, if there's a second SEC team that looks really good and potentially beats Bama in the SEC championship, I think that'll be another team, whether that's a Florida or a Georgia or, LSU has a really good year, loses. It's weird because you can't LSU and Bama can't both be in the SEC championship because it's different sides. But I could potentially see like Bama beats LSU and then Bama wins the SEC championship and then LSU gets in there also because who knows if they're going to take an outside team. So I'd say Clemson, Bama, Oklahoma/Texas, and then one more SEC team. I know that's not a definitive group of 4, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. Clemson, and Clemson's going to have some challengers out of the ACC this year. They're going to have Notre Dame. And I'm not very high on Notre Dame. I think that they're a team that on a typical season, their cap is probably 10 wins, but a 10-win team could be an 11-win team in one year. It could be an 8-9 win team in another year. So it depends on what Notre Dame is like. But Clemson's going to have to deal with them. And then UNC is another team out of the ACC that people aren't talking about a ton right now. But they had a lot of intrigue at the end of last year. They got a really good quarterback. And they're going to be a challenger for sure. Mac Brown's done a great job down there with that program. It's not just a basketball school right now. They've got a little bit of excitement around that football program. But I do like Clemson going in there. You're absolutely right. I think it ends up being Alabama. There's definitely going to be some drama coming out of that conference. That's why I asked you that question. But I do believe that Saban is in a really unique headspace right now because this is like everybody's been talking about kind of all these other teams out of the SEC and not as much about Bama. And Saban's the type of guy like Belichick who will always create some sort of us against the world type of mentality, even when everybody's rooting for them. But he doesn't have to manufacture that this year. And so I think it becomes a really, really good situation for them to actually have a team that's going to, be ready to go and just they're going to be motivated. I'll put it like that. I have no confidence in Texas to actually win that conference, the Big 12. So I'm going to go with Oklahoma for my third. And then fourth team, I'm kind of with you. It's going to be kind of a hodgepodge out of the SEC there, but I do think it becomes 2 SEC teams unless we get an undefeated Cincinnati or something like that out of the American. I think this becomes a year where the playoff maybe tests the waters of putting a group of 5 team into the playoffs just because you have that lack of Power 5 football being played. And so the final question I'll ask you before you hop back out, and I'll bring you back in later on this show, is if you were a university president or the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, what would be your return to play timeline? Like, what is the best way to come back?
Well, I mean, and first off, I want to say this. I just pulled up the AP poll, and it's very weird that 9 of the teams in the top 25 have a little asterisk next to it because they're not playing.
So
that's very weird. And Penn State was preseason 9, which is pretty crazy.
They're going to be good.
I mean, as it gets further and further through September, it becomes harder and harder to have a return to play plan that lines up with the college football playoff. If I was doing it right now, I would make an announcement and say practice resumes right now. Season starts October 10th. You got to get the college football playoff committee on board to push that back potentially into late January, maybe even the weekend before the Super Bowl. How crazy would that be if the national championship was the weekend before the Super Bowl? But yeah, I think the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. But it's weird because no one's talking about the Pac-12. Yeah. People are only talking about the Big Ten and what they should do and how Trump's talking to the Big Ten president and all that kind of stuff. And Pac-12 is just like real quiet on the side. Not really, you don't really hear their name a whole lot.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. And I mean, they talked about Pac-12 just a little bit because of some of the rapid testing capabilities that have come about. But again, out on the West Coast, for folks that aren't really following, Oregon and California aren't even really opened up the same way that we're seeing states out here in the Midwest and down south and everywhere else opened up. Like they don't have students on college campuses, so it would be a big upset to actually bring student athletes back anytime soon with some of the restrictions those states have. And between California and Oregon, that's 6 of their conference members that wouldn't be able to congregate currently the way things are right now. So I think that's part of the deal. And then when you talk about the politics, like we have to be completely honest about it. There's not a damn battleground state out west for Trump to try to win, but you got Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey that Donald Trump is eyeing for the election. So the way I kind of see it, and it's a very unique situation, is, you know, Trump actually gets football back and he's going to win over the hearts of a lot of Midwesterners. Trump doesn't get football back and he can blame the Democrats for it. Very, very interesting situation. We'll watch how this all plays out politically, but you're right. It's such a weird dichotomy from the Big Ten and how angry people are that we're not playing to out west. You hear almost nothing about anybody stumping to play football right now. It's just not even on their radar.
Yeah, maybe it has to do with the fact that like our Twitters are filled with Big Ten feeds and our Big Ten accounts and stuff like that. And, you know, that's who we know, that's who we follow, that's who we interact with. But I've seen some tweets from people that cover the Pac-12 that are like, I cover the Pac-12 and there's no news. There's nothing coming up. Something that I think is funny that I've seen on Twitter a few times is, you know, Michigan is one of the teams that's rumored to not want to play.
Right.
And everyone's like, oh, well, the Big Ten's been playing without Michigan for the last 10 years. Like, Michigan needs to play for there to be a real Big Ten season, because whether Ohio State fans want to admit it or not, they're the second or third or fourth, maybe with Penn State, best team in the conference. And it would hurt the Big Ten overall if a team like Michigan was not in. So as funny as it is to say, like, Michigan hasn't even been a part, you know, because Ohio State beats them every year, like, you need them to play.
No, I agree with that. But also to the people who are kind of like, you know, joking around about it, to their point, it definitely hurts the Big Ten more to not play at all than to play without Michigan. So
True.
It would be interesting to see. I know there's some smoke around that, and I'll start getting into this. So, Andrew, I'll ask you to jump back out. I'm about to go off on some college football stuff real quick, and then once I'm through with this, we can talk a little bit of NFL. All right?
All right,
so,
sounds good.
Here's the deal with college football, folks. Let's chat. So there's been a lot of speculation. Andrew and I kind of talked about it a little bit, about this Big Ten football start date and the president's vote. And we're supposed to get the vote on Friday. They were supposed to announce the start date as October 10th, and that's a date that a lot of people are eyeing because it makes sense for the college football playoff and everything else. And I'm not saying that all this stuff isn't going to happen. I'm hoping that it does happen. I'm hoping that's a timeline where we can expect to see football in the Big Ten is October 10th. But I am not very confident that it's going to happen. And we talked about disappointment last week at the end of the show. And I said there were 2 factors in disappointment: is hope and expectations. And right now, I think some fans have way too much hope and other people have really out of whack expectations. And I think part of the reason for the false hope and the crazy expectations is the media that we are consuming right now. And I can speak for, you know, the Midwest Big Ten Conference specifically, but I can speak definitely to Columbus with a high level of confidence. In Columbus, we have a ton of OSU fan sites, a ton of media that covers Ohio State, specifically Ohio State football. And pretty much any of these cats can get credentialed to go to OSU home games and cover them. So they all feel like they're experts and everybody's validated that way. And there are some other fan bases in the Big Ten like that. The most outspoken fan base outside of ours right now was probably Nebraska. And then outside of that, we've got Iowa, who's pretty outspoken. But the reality of the situation is I'm tuned into Columbus, so I'm speaking to this. So it's a really strange situation because the people who run these fan sites and that work on the beat, whether it's for some of the bigger media outlets in Columbus or some of the smaller ones, they thrive on Big Ten football. And specifically, folks in Columbus thrive on Ohio State football. And so there is a lack of national reach when it comes to reporting and when it comes to sources. And that means that a lot of times these folks' sources are folks that are athletic department staffers, even sources as obscure as a coach's nanny, somebody that these folks would like to talk to. And so the sources that they're using are leaking info into the media, and it's purposeful because it applies pressure to the Big Ten Conference to make a decision. But you have to understand that when their information is being leaked by a coach, by an athletics department staffer, whatever the case is, these coaches and these department staffers are as powerless in this situation as me, as you, as anybody, really, that comes down to it. That's not a university president and that's not the conference commissioner. And even athletic directors, to a certain point, they don't have the sway right now that you think they do. You know, their best, I guess, their best way to sway this decision is their relationship with the university president. But ultimately, the university president has to make a decision on their own with input, obviously, from these people and medical staff and everything else. So the athletic directors don't have a voting interest in this, neither do college football coaches. And so when you see some of these reports coming from local media outlets where those are probably some of their sources, that's what they would like to see, but that's not something necessarily that's going to happen, right? So let's flip it around. Enter folks like Nicole Auerbach, Pete Thamel, Pat Forty, and Wolkin, some of these people that are national reporters that have huge platforms and elevated sources. These folks are not reporting things like there is going to be a vote on, Friday, this past Friday, and it's going to be a yes vote, and the Big Ten is going to resume football on October 10th. You saw zero reports like that from any of these people. And so then you get to a point where it's like, oh, man, well, Auerbach and Thamel and 40, they don't want to see football this fall. They're opponents of football. And the reality of the situation is it seems like that because these people are posting they're talking about teams that share their COVID stats, or they're putting those campus COVID numbers on there. They're putting team COVID numbers on there. They're shutting down all these rumors about suspected votes and start dates and et cetera. And the reason they do it is because these folks are legitimate journalists that have a ton of integrity in the work that they do. And they have a direct line to conference commissioners and university presidents and people that make decisions. And so they have the ability to quell the spread of disinformation. So they're giving accurate information from vetted sources instead of spreading false hope. And that has become rooting against football. And it's led to serious vitriol and threats against some of these good people that are just doing their jobs. I was listening to an Ohio State podcast this past week, and they spent a lot of time crapping on Nicole Auerbach, who's a friend of mine. And one of the things the host said is that she's a mouthpiece for the Big Ten Conference. And so when you listen to that as a consumer of media, and this is one thing that I love to study. I studied consumer sciences in college, so I'm interested in marketing, and I'm interested in how people consume, different products, different businesses, different media. So when you're a consumer of this media and you hear a person that is shitting on Nicole Auerbach by saying that she is a mouthpiece for the Big Ten Conference, that person is admitting to you that she is getting her information directly from the Big Ten Conference and the conference commissioner, and they are still willing to put out unvetted sources, unvetted reports from whatever their sources are. That's not what journalism is. When we fast forward to this same person, they were listening to a Nebraska radio show talking about this alleged Big Ten president's vote and the start date and everything else. And one of the hosts suggested that the vote was going to happen on Monday, which is today we're recording. The show's going to come out tomorrow. So yesterday was supposed to be this announcement about a Big Ten vote, which again would be a little bit of an upset to me because today is a holiday and a lot of these cats are state employees. So I don't know if they're even willing to work today. And I could be totally wrong. The show will come out tomorrow and I could be sitting here with egg on my face and I'll have to tell my producer to edit this thing out. But the reality is somebody suggested that, but the way they suggested it, they were being totally facetious. They were not being serious at all about what they reported. And this cat ran with it, posting on his Twitter account. It's supposed to be Monday. This is the timing that we're going to get it. It's going to be a yes vote, etc. Same guy. And I got to pull up this tweet for you so I can read it so you can understand what kind of lunatic it is. But he basically was going in on Pat 40 because of something that he misread. So 40 said on Feinbaum's show, I don't think there's a lot of evidence that players running into each other on the practice field or the game field has proven to be a virus spreader. I think that's given some people confidence to go forward. So essentially what 40 said is that there is no proof or evidence that playing football and running into people actually spreads the virus more than doing any other activity. And so now there are a lot of people in athletic departments, coaching staffs, et cetera, that are getting confidence from that. This guy completely misread it and quote tweeted it and said, this kind of fear porn by Pat 40 is what irks a lot of people. Tell me this, Pat, if people who are running into each other are all testing negative, explain this voodoo on how it correlates to virus spreaders. How can you be a virus spreader if you don't have it? So these people in their minds, they want to create this drama and they want to direct their anger at somebody. You know, he's tweeting at Pat 40 about, oh, well, prove what you're saying. And it's Pat 40 is literally saying that playing football doesn't spread the virus anymore. Like, these people are so rabid, they won't even actually read what's going on. They'll just look at a couple of words that pop up in a tweet, and then they'll start rage tweeting. Now, the biggest disappointment with this person has, I don't want to say attacked, but they have tweeted and they have spread really bad information about some of these national reporters. This person has 23,000 followers on Twitter, and they're a contributor for one of the largest Ohio State fan sites. There's no integrity to that, and it's just a bunch of hot takes. And what I understand out of this situation is that all these people want football, and I agree with that sentiment. I want football here in the Big Ten. We need football here in the Big Ten for a lot of people. If you're somebody who's a beat reporter, if you're somebody who works for local media, that's job security for you. You know, I talked to somebody who works in a local TV job, and they said that when the Big Ten Conference postponed the season, they were literally worried that their job might be furloughed until the season picks back up. That's why people are so invested in trying to get football back. But attacking national reporters is not going to get football back. And the reality of the situation is these people have to put out some sort of reports, and they have to drum up some drama because, you know, the iffy reports get people to click, and you know, the hot takes generate buzz, and that's what keeps the bills paid for a lot of these people. But to direct a mob toward reporters who share information from vetted sources, it's just ignorant. And like I said before, the national reporters are as powerless as the rest of us, and they might be doing PR work for the conference. You know, I completely understand that, and that would be disappointing to somebody who's working a media job that is now very uncertain because the Big Ten Conference isn't playing. But because they're doing the PR work, or because they're sharing vetted reports, doesn't mean that they're in opposition to football, and doesn't mean they have control over the situation. And when I was talking to Nicole this past week, Nicole Auerbach, she was telling me that she's gotten threats from folks and that some people have obtained her personal information. It's sick, people. It is absolutely sick to do that. And so after sharing all this, there are going to be some listeners who'll be like, oh man, well, JP, you're rooting against football. You know, you're over here. You're not on our side. I guess you don't want to see football either. You guys are just stupid if you think that's the situation. It's just dumb. I work for the Big Ten Network. For those people who don't understand, we literally only cover Big Ten athletics. Nothing else but Big Ten athletics. So when we don't have football, that means my job doesn't exist. Why? Because I am a football studio analyst. There is no football, so there is no reason to have a football studio analyst. And so what happens to me? I'm out here, and I love what I'm doing right now. I'm not trying to downplay what I'm doing, but I am covering Central Ohio high school football with radio color commentary. It's been great getting to watch football again. It makes no sense to me how high schools can play football, but Ohio State can't. That's neither here nor there. I get to cover high school football right now. But here's the reality of that situation is I could do 15 weeks of high school football and not make what I would make in one weekend working my studio job with Big Ten Network. I want college football as much as anyone else. But I also realize how powerless I am in this situation and what a fool's errand it is to direct my anger at other people who don't call the shots either. So instead, I'm taking my decreased pay and I'm taking it in stride because I get to learn a new skill this fall that's going to help me expand my media career. And so some of you folks out here that are listening to this that are angry at reporters, that are angry at people who are giving you COVID numbers, that are talking about whatever, you need to carry less anger and you need to put more control into your life. You need to figure out what you can do this fall to control and improve your life. And so whatever that is, learning a new hobby, learning a new skill, do it, because rage tweeting isn't going to get you your football back. So I kind of had to get that off my chest. It is absolutely so wild how we've gotten to a place where somebody can be reporting facts that are germane to what's going on in the world of college athletics, and they can be attacked. And they can say, people can say that they're not a champion of football and they don't want to see it played when they're literally doing their jobs. And I need that anger to be directed into control. And I need you to control the variables in your life, which means not worrying about when football is going to be played or how it's going to be played or whatever, because we have no control over that. But just have some control and get rid of that anger because it's crazy. I'll read you some scores now from this weekend. So my deal is my fiance ain't going to let me watch football because she's never had a fall at home with me. And so I watched like 10 minutes probably total of football this weekend, which is disappointing. I'm going to try to sneak next weekend and sneak and geek and watch a little bit more, but this weekend it didn't go down. We had Marshall 59, which I watched the beginning of that game, Eastern Kentucky 0, Army 42, Middle Tennessee 0, SMU 31, Texas State 24. And I believe Texas State was playing that game with no tight ends, and I think that had to do with some contact tracing and all that other kind of stuff. But Texas State really gave the business to SMU as much as they could handle, really. So it was really unique and interesting to watch that. And as we watch these games as they unfold early on this year, you have to realize a lot of schools lost spring ball and they've lost training camp time, et cetera, trying to figure out all of this COVID world. So we're going to see a lot of probably base offense and defense. We're going to see maybe some game plans that are super simple coming out the gates. And then you might see situations where teams that are underdogs, they kind of negate that advantage that the better team would have just because they haven't had all the same prep time as usual. Very interesting there. And then Memphis, which had many starters out of their lineup, 37, Arkansas State 24. So there's college football deal for you. I'll have more updates next week as we move along this thing. So I'll bring my guy Zoldan back so we can talk a little bit of NFL news. We had roster trimmings. We had some contract signings. We had all kind of stuff going on. So we'll start with your team, Cleveland Brownies. What are the thoughts going into this year?
So I'm actually on record. I went on the Browns Huddle podcast and said this. That's another show on the Zedia network. And the host, Jason Hand, was not too happy about me saying this, but I'm a little nervous about Baker. I don't know if Baker is starting after the bye week. Because the bye week is conveniently right after week 8. So right in the middle of the season. And I think if the Browns start 2-6, which looking at the schedule is very plausible, because you got the Cowboys, or maybe the Texans are after the bye, but you got like the Cowboys, the Ravens, and then you got games that you should win, like the Washington football team and the Bengals. So if those are losses and the Browns are like 2-6 to start the season, I think you potentially see Case Keenum after the bye, because a guy like Kevin Stefanski, the new head coach, if you're the Browns coach, you're coaching for your job every year.
Right.
And if you start 2-6 and Baker looks bad and you think, you know what, we've had him for 3 years, maybe he's not the guy, then you got to go with Keenum in the second half of the season. And you and me both know that I wouldn't be complaining about Justin Fields running that team in 2 years.
Damn, that is so crazy. That's like, I think that might be the hottest take I've heard in terms of Browns talk, is Baker not starting after the bye.
Well, and it's as I'm wearing my Baker sweatshirt here. So I like Baker. I want him to be good. I think he could turn the corner this year, which the Browns need, but I'm a little nervous. Last year, everyone was like, Baker looks so good in camp. He's great. The offense looks so good. He had the rookie record for passing touchdowns last year. He looks great. He's going to be great. I'm hearing nothing this year. And I know that there's some other things going on in the world that may be why I'm not hearing about how Baker looks in practice. But I mean, last year the people were acting like he was Tom Brady coming into the season, and this year it sounds like he's closer to that Blake Bortles season when they moved on from him than Brady. And I would love to see him it's not prove me wrong because I don't think I think he can be good. I just need to see it. And he gets pumped up for the games against bad teams, and then he doesn't perform against the good teams. So he'll beat up on the Bengals in week 2 and have 5 touchdowns and be flexing and showing off and all that kind of stuff, which is I love when he does that. But then, they got the Cowboys in week 4 in Dallas. I would love to see Baker flexing and showing off and stuff in a win in a big game like that. But if they beat the Ravens week 1, then I'm retracting everything I say.
Alrighty then. So speaking of the Ravens, let's just take a little trip around the AFC North. What are your thoughts, outlooks, expectations?
So normally I'm very anti the other teams in the AFC North because it's the rivals. You're not supposed to like the rivals. Okay. But Lamar Jackson is the coolest guy ever.
Yes.
Second place on that list is Joe Burrow. So 3 of the teams in the AFC have cool swaggy QBs, but I still don't like the Steelers. So I think it shakes down like this. I legitimately think the Browns could finish in any place in the AFC North. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they beat the Ravens once this year and the Ravens struggle a little and the Browns win the division. And I wouldn't be surprised if they, suck and the Bengals beat them. Bengals beat them twice and they don't win the division. But if I had to give a prediction, I would say, the Ravens repeat, win the division again because of how good they are. The Browns and Steelers kind of hover in that 7 to 10 win range. If I think if they split the series, then it's anyone's game to come in second in the division. But I think if the Browns can beat the Steelers twice, or vice versa, then that will be the team that comes in second in the division. And I think Burrow has an exciting season, but the Bengals just stay in the basement of the AFC North for another year.
Yeah, that basement's a tough spot to be in. All right, and then I'll leave with this. You like following the Buckeyes? 50 Buckeyes on opening day rosters. How about it?
It's very, 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 very cool. I think you could make like a legitimate full fantasy team now with all the Buckeyes that are in the league, and it would be an actual like good roster with guys that you want between, you'd have Haskins, Zeke, Michael Thomas, or Haskins, Zeke, Dobbins, Michael
Yep.
Thomas, Terry McLaurin.
Yep.
Who would be that tight end spot?
As Marcus Ball made the Washington football team.
Okay, so Marcus Ball at tight end, and then you could take the Saints defense because they have all the Buckeyes. So you definitely could make a fantasy team of them, and I think they're all going to be pretty good this year. I assume that you are in the same boat as me, excited to see what the Washington football team looks like with Chase, Terry, and Dwayne, and that's a little plug to buy the Washington Buckeyes hoodie that we have on the Zedia website.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be really exciting. Dwayne Haskins, for me, is going to be the one to watch out of the group because I like the season that he had at Ohio State was ridiculous. And then you come into the league and it's always tough as a rookie, but so many obstacles for him. But just from what I've heard and how he's worked in the offseason and everything else, I think they got some really high expectations. And so I'm super excited to see that. So, all right, Zoldan, appreciate your input, man.
I'm jumping off again. You're doing a great job on this episode. You're killing it.
Thanks. All right, so we, like I said, we got some NFL news. Obviously, 50 Buckeyes on rosters right now is ridiculous. It was roster trim down time, and so one of the, I guess, maybe surprise transactions was Adrian Peterson getting released from the Washington football team, and he was signed by Detroit. And now they've got a little bit of an interesting backfield. They got like 6 running backs, and some guys are banged up, but they've got some dudes. Like, they've got some real guys where, they're walking into the stadium on game day, and you're like, ooh, what we going to do there? So they'll have an attack by committee, and I think it'll be pretty good there. Cam Hayward, the great defensive lineman for the Steelers, re-upped his money. He got a 4-year extension worth $65.5 million in new money, under contract for a total of 5 years now with $75 million in wages. That is now the highest paid defensive player over 30 in league history, based on yearly average. So congrats to him. Also, congrats to the agency that negotiated that deal, Element Sports Group, the best in the business. They also rep me as a player and now rep me as a media guy. So doing a great job locking down some money for their clients. Very awesome. And then Josh McCown, how about this? Oldest player on P squad in NFL history, emergency quarterback for Philly. So his job description is to live in Texas, do the Zoom thing into meetings, get the game plan together, whatever he's got to do, and he will make $12,000 a week doing that. Not a bad gig. Any NFL folks that are listening, not in very good shape anymore, but I will be an emergency linebacker. I don't need $12,000 a week to do it. So if anybody's looking for one, holla at your boy. I'll shift gears probably to the first bit of positive news. All podcasts, we have positive news. So a woman named Lashenda Williams gets a new start in life. I think this is down in Nashville where this happened. But Lashenda Williams became addicted to drugs, and as a result spent a year living out of her car. And every night she would park in a Kroger parking lot, recline her seat back, and that's how she would rest. And obviously, a very difficult situation in her life. Not a lot of hope, not a lot of joy, obviously, in living like that. But there was a hiring manager at the store. Her name is Jackie Vandal. And she noticed Williams outside of the store and put her on to this job fair that was going on and told Williams, hey, you know what? I'll help you get your application. I'll help you apply for this job fair. You can come through, sit down and have an interview, and we'll see what happens. So Williams applied for the job. She interviewed for it. They did a little vetting of her background and ended up hiring her on the spot. So it's great there. And after 8 months of working at this job, Williams had saved up enough money to rent and furnish an apartment for herself. So now she is no longer homeless. And she was quoted in the article off of Today's Show, I believe.com, where she said she was really grateful for the opportunity. So this is the type of news that is really exciting for me. There are so many people that are struggling in life. Like we, talk about that. She had the drug addiction, which led to her losing shelter. And then she was jobless and living out of a car. And a lot of times we would expect a person like that to meet such adversity and to just kind of give up on their process. Being addicted to drugs, which I've never been, but I know people who have overcome and they continue to battle addiction. I know how difficult that is. I also know how difficult homelessness is from people who I have met that have overcome that stage in their life to obtain steady shelter. And she was dealing with both. And she had intervention, obviously, from a great person, this Jackie Vandal, who wanted to help out and wanted to see her become gainfully employed, and eventually helped her find an apartment that she could rent and she could afford to furnish. But reality of the situation is one of those never give up stories, And she said she was grateful for the opportunity. I think that's big too. The fact that you don't give up and you don't just say, all right, well, this is a lost cause, and you stop doing all the things it takes to bring yourself out of that situation. But the fact that she even had that opportunity, it took somebody else's intervention to really help her. And this woman, Jackie, who was the manager of the store, helped her apply and helped her put together the resume and do all the things that she needed to do. And so it goes to show that you got to extend a helping hand every once in a while, folks. You see people, and we're in a society where it's hard, I think, sometimes to do the right thing, because we'll see somebody standing outside of a Walmart panhandling, and you'll say, well, that person is probably an addict, and they might just be playing me, this, that, and the third. But for somebody with a keen eye and who's paying attention, not every situation's like that. There are some people that are genuinely on hard times and they really do need help. And so I think kind of the theme of this podcast, when talking about Black Lives Matter and some of the social movements and other marginalized groups outside of Black people, in talking about, kind of this vitriol we've seen in college football media and these attacks on people because we're upset in our personal lives. And now listening to this story, it's always good to press pause, take a step back, try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and really develop an understanding of the situation of other people. And when we go into our interactions with folks, I think we need to go in there with our guard down. Too many times we have our guard up. Too many times we're ready to play defense. We're ready to lash out, and we're ready to make judgments and make attacks and assaults on people, when a lot of times it's not going to help anything, number one. But number two, if you take a step back and you put yourself in somebody else's situation, you realize that it's not the plan of attack. So just wanted to end off with that there. I thought it was really cool. And then finally, my word of the week, end you with this word, and the word is control. And I talked about it in the college football segment, where I was talking about all the things going on in the different, battling media outlets. But here we are, control. Definition: as a noun, it means the power to influence or direct one's behavior or the course of events. As a verb, it is determine the behavior of. Control has been really unique this year, I think, with COVID. COVID has taken a lot of our personal control out of situations, whether it's control over your job, whether it is control over your ability to participate in recreational activities, whether it's your control over your ability to watch your favorite team play football this fall. COVID has really tested us in terms of control. But I want to address something within this definition. So as a noun, the power to influence or direct one's behavior or the course of events. It's interesting, to influence or direct one's behavior, right? So when we talk about control, it's not necessarily controlling things like, do we play college football? Controlling things like, am I going to have a job tomorrow? Because those aren't things that you have an influence over. It's not your direct behavior, right, that you're controlling there. Your control is, I'm going to go into my job every day with the right attitude. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to make sure that my boss notices me, and I'm going to provide value. So when they are making cuts, they really have to think hard about if my job is going to be one that they cut. When we're talking about control, it's not control over watching college football. It's control over, what are you going to do with that time that you have now? That you can't watch college football. You're not going to be able to root on your favorite team. And maybe you decide, you know what, since I'm not watching Iowa play football this year, I'm going to start watching Clemson. And that's how you want to spend your Saturdays. Go ahead. I'm not telling you not to, but you need to control your attitude as you're watching Clemson. You can't sit there and rage watch. It's not good for your health. Blood pressure is going to be high. You're going to stress your heart out. You can't do those types. You can do them, but you should have the control to be emotionally intact as you consume college football, if you're that tied to it that you're so upset that your team's not playing. And we talk about control over a course of events, the power to influence or direct the course of events. This one is the one that becomes interesting. We in college learned from Tim Kite, who's a great leadership coach, E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. So it talks about controlling the course of events. In that training, we were taught that you cannot control the event. What you can control is the response, and that becomes the outcome. So when you talk about a course of events, it's not the first event that you really control, right? It's something happens to you, but what you control is that response. That response dictates the outcome, and then that outcome dictates the next event, which you can control your response to that, and etc. So when we're talking about the course of events, you get one thing that happens to you, you cannot control. Everything after that is up to you because of your response. Your response will determine the outcome. That next outcome will determine the next event, which you, again, can determine your response to, and that predicts another outcome. So these are all things I want people to understand. Control is big. There are so many things that we don't have control of. I can't control other people's behaviors. I can't control other people's decision-making. I can't control how long we're going to be gripped by COVID and all the crazy things going on out there. But what I can control is having a written budget so my financial house is in order just in case something happens to my job, which did happen to me. I am able to say, okay, this is what I need to do to make sure my household is up and running so I'm not stressed out. I can control my attitude when I go out there. Like I said, I love high school football. I would rather be working with Big Ten Network right now, but I take my ass out there every Friday, great attitude, absolutely trying to build a great skill and enjoying the high schools that are playing around us because there's some great players and some great football going on. You know, I can't control if somebody's mad at me. I can't control if somebody dislikes me. What I can control is how I interact with that person and the energy and the attitude that I bring to it. What I cannot control is some of the craziness going on in the world. I cannot control racism. I can't. There are so many wild things I can't control, but what I can control is the work that I'm doing in my community to try to combat those things, my personal attitudes and visions toward it, and the work that I put in so I can break through barriers and try to overcome as well. So the word of the week, folks, is control. Exercise control in your life. It will change your life, I promise you. So about to wrap this bad boy up. But before we do, I want you guys to go to ZDNetwork.com. I want you to click shop when you get there. And I want you to check out some of the cool gear that they have in the store. Washington Buckeye shirt. Fantastic. Awesome piece of apparel right there. We also have Joshua Perry Show apparel. I want everybody to be out there repping it. As soon as I get mine in, I'm going to be repping it too. But go ahead again to ZDNetwork.com, click shop, and check out what's going on in the store. So that's it, folks. It's going to wrap it up. I want to thank my all-star producer and contributor this week, Andrew Zoldan, doing a great job giving us some insight on college football, AFC North. I'm signing off of the ZDN Network for this week. I am Joshua Perry, and this is The Joshua Perry Show.